Alright. Hi everyone. um, uh, so nice to see everybody here. Um, I think I've been back after 10 years. I was very honored to be invited by the Academy to give me hi. It showed you, right? Helen. I'm sorry. But 10 years ago, I was invited to deliver my Hawking lecture. That was, I remember I presented the topic of East meets West, which is basically a comparison of the United States, education in the United States and in China and in other countries, more East Asia countries. I'm very happy to be back 10 years later. This time, I'm going to present something about my evolving complexity theory. That's my main goal. This is a theory, clearly, in the wake of the changes you might even call paradigm shift, which is that we traditionally think that the gifted education is about a very tiny, small group of people, that we serve them well, and it's very much like a special education mode, meaning they have certain things that makes them different from the rest of the population. Make sense? Now, the talent development idea is basically say, wait a second, maybe each of us has some strengths, have some things to develop. It's never like it's us versus them. Make sense? It's like we all have something. So then the issue becomes how we know when they show some strength. So in that process, we start to think about how do development matters. Does that make sense? Development matters means the whole thing of human potential is something that is unfolding rather than it's out there. Right? Out there means we can dust it off and find it. No, it's like they're growing, and we start to see emerging qualities. Initially, it's hiding somewhere. Now we show it's because of what? We're exposed to certain opportunities. We have certain experiences. And the more important things from a talent development idea is like each of us are different. That means you are strong in certain areas, I'm strong in other areas. That is very much Professor Lee here, Dr. Lee here is giving me the magazines about MI, which is multiple intelligence, which is the idea that probably we show our strengths in different ways. So if that's the case, that we really have to think again about human potential in terms of how we capture those strengths, how we capture those moments that we can capitalize on for our education system, from our education system to nurture their potential. So it's more than just to identify things. How many of you actually heard of the name of Joseph Renzulli by the Joseph Renzulli? Some of you? Joseph Renzulli basically is my mentor when I was a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Connecticut. And he basically says, when you look at what he calls giftedness, you should not think of giftedness is what? Static. It's there, it's fixed, you either find it or you don't find it, or you either have it or you don't have it. But rather, it's something growing. It's something we can nurture. So that's his theory. So his model, more or less, is in line with our trend, with our more new argument about talent development. That's the first, I'm going to introduce a little bit. May not be everything, but you can always get some more detailed picture of this model that I developed, or theory I developed. I'm writing a book on this topic, and it's going to be published next year, so you will have opportunity. I would be more interested to hear what you think about, or what I think that I can offer. I can offer my initial thought. So I guess I would say most of you, if not all of you, heard of something called ChatGPT, right? So it becomes a big news, particularly in the education circle. I personally also feel the same way, that it will have a repercussion on everything we do, on everything we do. Traditionally, we think that we can develop certain talents, certain areas that we think it's our job to do that. And then we have to think about, is that with ChatGPT, who can do lots of mind work, okay? Is that going to be the situation where we think is a talented today, 10 years later, it's no longer talent? That you can very easily find a job today, but 10 years later, the same skill, the same kind of talent, they don't have a job anymore. They cannot find a job anymore because the machine is doing better. Make sense? So that is basically a major challenge to me, to think again about what exactly the kind of things the human beings are doing well that the machine intelligence cannot do. What we will think about eventually, this is a big topic, even later on, I think who will actually survive and thrive are the people who actually can harness artificial intelligence to do human things. Does that make sense? So this is still very important because the machine intelligence can be very good at certain things, but we know how to use them for doing good things. That's very important because the machine will not say, machine has a one-track mind, okay? You ask the machine to do things, they do it very well, but sometimes it violates a lot of ethical rules. You know, what we humans think is that you're not supposed to do that. Does that make sense? Because the machine has a one-track mind, they will destroy human beings without a glitch. If you ask the machine to do that, is that what we want? No, right? So you have to think about what we are good at in a way that a machine could not be. So that's something that I have been thinking about a lot. What kind of changes that we have to make? So let's move on. I'm going to introduce, first of all, what do I mean by engaging the world? Which basically means that I can briefly give you an idea, which is ultimately we should think about engaging the world, acting upon the world, being active, generating experiences has some primacy in terms of your development. Does that make sense? Let's say, suppose someone is very gifted, but they only know how to enjoy beach, they only know how to enjoy all the things, doing nothing. Are they going to be growing up to be a person who is very useful, contribute to society? Probably not, because they don't use those things, right? Another thing to think about engaging the world is that experience matters. With experiencing, we know what the world looks like, right? How we understand the world, and I will give you other things to think about in terms of how our teachers can build up experiences of our students. Because experiences, from my evolving complexity theory, takes primacy. And if you have capacity, let's say, yeah, indeed, you might have capacity. I don't know. But you still have to use that capacity. Does that make sense? So that is the primacy of this engagement work. The second part is building the self. I don't think building the self is a separate thing from engaging the world. While you are engaging the world, you know what do you like, what do you don't like, what kind of experience really strike you as very meaningful, what kind of experience for you is that, wow, it's not really exciting for someone else, it's not me. You see? What is that? Engage in the world, tell you who you are, which is very important, okay? The third part is basically, earlier I talked about, it is still developing. in that sense, we don't know how eventually everything unfolds. We don't know. It takes probably 1 year, it takes maybe 3 years. Now we have a better idea about how the whole thing unfolds, how the whole thing means to education, means to talent development, means to gift education. We don't know yet, but we can have some guess about how it might change us in major way, okay? And the last thing is about education. So that's my talk. I try to capture certain things that I think I need to explain a little bit more. Otherwise, some of the things may be quite straightforward, and I decide not to spend much time. So the first part is engaging, representing, and modeling. To me, that the building skill, of course, involve lots of practice, involve lots of lesson taking and everything. But to me, talent development, or the talent, first is the action of engagement. The second thing is representing. Maybe the representing could be embodied representation, but it also can be symbolic representation. Does that make sense? It's symbolic, basically using words to describe what it is, but you can also have an embodied experience with it. Embodied representation means that your bodies actually help you understand the environment. Does that make sense? A lot of expertise, by the way, is embodied, meaning they cannot tell you how they come up with the idea. They know, they just know. This is the way you do things. Does that make sense? That kind of things is called embodied. Okay, embodied. But symbolically means that someone can explain to you why I should work this way. That's the only way that you can work, right? Or if you have 3 choices, the person tells you, you have 3 choices here, and the why, first choice is always better than the second one, right? So then you are more articulated in that sense. You can articulate your expertise in that way. So talent development takes that representation. And modeling is what I think is also another way to describe what's going on when you build up high-level skill, or you build up a high-level talent. In many ways that we can think about modeling is a mathematical modeling. It could be also modeling, right? But when you use a metaphor to describe your things, metaphor fundamentally is a modeling, right? You're using a metaphor here, everybody understand, to describe something else, which is, I will show you my way of modeling talent development. I use several models, okay? That's my modeling. Does that make sense? That my way of modeling those things. Okay, why evolving complexity? So I compare with Francis Gordon. So this is a little bit historical background, because our gift education started from Louis Terman. And Louis Terman started from Francis Gordon. The idea Gordon basically proposed is a more or less a capacity view, right? It's a genius idea, that the genius runs in family. Make sense? That if your dad is a genius, you're more likely to be a genius, right? This genius idea or giftedness idea comes from this natural endowment. You either have it or you don't have it. Sorry, you don't have it. Or congratulations, you got it. Make sense? I personally feel it's a simplified, so oversimplified view of human potential. I'm not sure whether you agree with me, okay? So this is Francis Gordon's idea. By the way, he's a cousin of Charles Darwin, okay? And he very much developed this idea because he looked at his cousin. Wow, he must be a genius. Why is it that I didn't have that idea of evolution of species? Then he got it. But there must be genius that created this idea. Anyway, reductionism versus emergence in science is the idea that traditionally, if you look at science is very much reductive or reductionistic. Means what? Physics is the most simple example, right? Such a complex world, we're using Newtonic physics or Einstein theory, simple mathematical formula, explaining what? Lots of things. Make sense? Very complex thing reduced to very simple things. That's a reductionism. But we also have another theory that now it becomes more, sometimes we call them, how many of you actually heard of something called complexity science? Complexity science means dynamic system is a complexity science. Okay? Dynamic system theory, general system theory, the system theory can, or control theory is actually involves some complexity. Control theory typically using feedback loop idea. Feedback loop, information feedback, could be positive feedback, negative feedback, even feedback and feed forward. And those are complex systems because information flow that matters. And a control theory is also very important. It's how you control the system, right? We also want to think about how we actually create a system that automate control. The automation of control. Make sense? We have a lot of engineering doing those kind of things. Anyway, emerging this idea is something emergent, okay? So this is a kind of a theoretical thing, but I want to emphasize that the emergence idea violates a traditional idea of a causal relationship. The typical causal relationship is A causes B. So in medical research, we try to determine if we have a possibility of our candidates for cancer, we have A, B, C, D. Let's determine is that A? Is that B? Is that C? What if A, B, C, D all matters? It's emergence. Emergence means there was no single cause for the emergence of a new quality. Let's say this new quality is called high blood pressure. It's not one thing causes it. It's several things coming together, working together, something new emerge. That is very much under the idea of my evolving complexity theory. Meaning what? Evolving complexity means you has a body and a mind and everything. It's self-organized to produce new quality. This new quality can be what? In some teachers would say this new quality could be, wow. A student says, the teacher that you are here, sitting here, teacher, you teach me something that actually illuminating something for me. Make sense? But only for that person. Other people don't feel that way. You see, emergence is an emergence of strong interest here. Wow, it's fascinating. My experience is that in 1980 something, when I watched Wei Qi, the Go play, Chinese play, played with Japanese players, right? There was a time that the Go is a very important. Go is a Wei Qi in Chinese, okay? It basically strikes me as such a powerful idea that it is profound game. Okay, it's a profound game. So those kind of emergence of interest tend to be something like that. Somehow the whole thing all self-organized, including the teacher, including me, including my experiences, come together to create something new. Okay, create something new. This is evolving complexity. That emergence of a quality cannot be explained by one thing, but it must be explained by several things coming together. Okay, that's the main idea. Anyway, okay. So development as evolving complexity is the idea that if you think about development, fundamentally human development or individual development, in terms of skill development, in terms of personality development, everything, you can roughly think about development is a fundamentally emergence. Does that make sense? That means that you, as a person, develop certain quality based on lots of experiences rather than only one experience, right? So it's an emergence. That emergence typically is caused by self-organization. Okay, that self-organization idea is that only what organisms have that self-organization. A machine does not self-organize. Does that make sense? So in that sense, we human beings can what? produce something new about us that a machine will not produce. Does that make sense? You all, I think all of you or most of you have cars. Can you hear anything like a car suddenly produce a kind of a stereo system so you can listen to music? No, you either install equipment or you don't have that. Make sense? But a human being is an organism. Organism is producing something. Make sense? So that is a difference. Anyway, emergence of novelty, emergent novelty, increasingly complex, goes through phase transition, intrinsically robust, extrinsically sensitive. These four properties describe developmental system. Human development have this kind of a development system. So that's the foundation of what? My theory of evolving complexity theory. Rather than saying that you either have it or you don't have it. Or sorry, you don't got it. Congratulations, you have it. It doesn't work that way because of what? Development. Development itself is complex. The last one is very important. Intrinsically robust means what? You know, we exposed to lots of things. Why is it that we still us? Me is still me. You are intrinsically robust. Certain things strike you as more important, other things less. Why is it? Because it's you. Make sense? Intrinsically robust. But at the same time, we are extrinsically sensitive. It means that we are extremely sensitive to opportunities. That's also adaptive, meaning that we are adaptive to what the environment can offer us. Okay? If I live in Hong Kong, it's one story. If I didn't live in Hong Kong, let's say I'm not living in Hong Kong, it's there are other opportunities there. So that's we are sensitive to experiences, we are sensitive to opportunities. Another way to think about it is that I grew up in a cultural revolution. Grew up during the cultural revolution. For many of the people who are much younger, like 20 years younger, you probably don't know much about cultural revolution in mainland China. Does that make sense? I was born in Shanghai and grew up in Shanghai. My years of 10 years of elementary school education and primary education and secondary education is exactly 1966 to 1976. And I graduated in 1976, okay? When Cultural Revolution ended. Happy time, okay? So thank God it's ended. Anyway, when you live through that years, you don't have much opportunity. Make sense? Everything is arranged for you, okay? So you don't even have you don't need to make a choice, basically. Now that's a different time, okay, very different time. Nowadays, you have a lot of choices to make, or a lot of decisions to make. Well, and also, with that decision making and choice, that means that nowadays the young people have to deal with uncertainties. Does that make sense? In my younger years, when I was a young kid, I don't face any uncertainty. Because of what? The government organizes everything for me. The government, even my person, belongs to government. Does that make sense? My person doesn't belong to me. It belongs to Communist Party. Anyway, so this is a very different story, okay? Very different story. Adaptive means intrinsically robust and extrinsically sensitive. It's almost like a paradoxical, but that's true. All of us are like that. 3 metaphors. Now, I'm modeling talent development starting. The first metaphor is octopus. I just realized that the batatung is an octopus idea. Now, why octopus is basically, that's another metaphor. Why it's an octopus? It's like we have a lot of sensor. We have a lot of protruding things to what? Detect the realities and capture things that we are interested in, or opportunities that we can grow. So that is a very important The second idea is onion metaphor. I'm going to explain to you later. Of course, onion means what? We peel off one thing, there was still something inside. We'll peel off. That's another way I try to help the readership, help you understand what talent development takes. Is there many layers of things that we have to pay attention to. It's just not just one layer, right? So that's something. The third metaphor is a metaphor. You just think about talent development is definitely it's not just 1 year in the making. It's probably 10 years in the making. Does that make sense? For example, I went to United States to pursue my doctoral work, okay? And then it definitely takes not just 10 years, it takes 20 years for me to publish my first book, for example, okay? Dr. Lee, I'm very happy to hear that you got my book that is published in 2010, which is it's called The Nature and Nurture of Giftedness.
Yeah, I read it.
Yeah. So that's the book I wrote after how many years? 12 years after my graduation. 12 years after my graduation. So it takes a lot of time to do, meaning you have to be persistent. Does that make sense? You have to really immerse in the field in order to really make a contribution, which is very natural because you think about how many years that the human beings accumulate those kind of knowledge. It will probably take more than 100 years, right? So if the accumulation of knowledge takes 100 years, you only take 10 years. It's a pretty good deal for you, right? But for our human life, that's indeed a lot of time commitment, a lot of dedication. So this is an octopus. You can see, basically you think about general model of this is I specify psychomotor, technical, intellectual, expressive, and in the middle is social. So I basically identify 5 dimensions. And Dr. Lee gave me something about Howard Gardner's work. If you compare my model with Howard Gardner's model, there's some similarity in terms of identifying the most important human qualities. For example, in the middle, why I put the social in the middle? We are social beings. Right? Think about it. Yeah, we can have academic skills and everything, but if socially you are inept, socially you are not capable of doing a lot of things, think about someone with a severe autism. They are in major trouble, right? Now, I'm not saying they cannot do great things. And there's some of the autistic children have talent in arts. Now, some of the autistic children have a great talent in computation. Okay, they can have a lot of, even mild. Think about it this way. Elon Musk, he described himself as a mild autistic syndrome. It's called Asperger's syndrome. Does that make sense? Asperger's syndrome is autism spectrum. It's very mild, and usually, as children, some of the children with Asperger's syndrome are actually quite strong intellectually. Okay, quite strong. But they do have a little awkwardness with the social. Even Elon Musk talking to people, you can still show a little bit. Okay, you can still tell a little bit differences between. It's a mild form. So this is the social, but also I identify other. And then you might think about psychomotor, which is the movement, right? But nowadays, if you think of psychomotor action, the nimbleness or the acuity, there was a lot of coordination of visual and the motor. It tells us something about the person. Does that make sense? Don't ever think this is only about sports. It is about human capability to work with things. And sometimes it can be very important, way beyond what? Way beyond sports, right? Because that's part of our strengths. Let alone that the sports, engaging sportsmen definitely build up your mental toughness. Do you agree? Mental toughness, that you have to handle stress. You have to handle obstacles. And so that's why I will actually, if some of you sitting here are parents, do anything about encourage your kids to engage in sports, because sports is not just about sports. Sport is build up your mental toughness. And mental toughness is a very important. Definitely, it's not like something. I'm not sure whether you know something which is suicide. The very little kids committing suicide. It's a terrible situation for parents and for siblings and for other people. But they cannot tolerate any frustration. Sports, you're frustrated all the time, right? Does that make sense? You have to go over the hurdle. You have to try many times. You're encouraged to try, and fail. Eventually, you made it. But that kind of experience is building your personality. Fundamental for talent development. Fundamental. Okay, so I'm not going to further describe this, but only to point out that some of our capability is embodied. Embodied means that we use our body, we use our feelings, we're using our gut feelings to handle the environment. Do we do that? Some of you, I have a gut feeling that it's going to work that way. No, never try to think, oh, wow, the gut feeling is wrong. No, sometimes gut feelings help us deal with the situation. Then the mind, because we don't have time to calculate. Does that make sense? Our body tells us something which is very important. Okay, and other side is symbolic. Of course, when you do certain things, you have to think very symbolically, very abstractly, like Einstein tried to figure out movement. Right? They have to use mathematical tools. That's symbolic. Right? And also using when we tell stories about our own life. Maybe some of you sitting here are writers, creative writers, or non-fiction writers. It's symbolic. Means what? You have to use your language to describe feelings, describe interactions, describe the drama. Make sense? Using all the best words that capture attention, get the feeling that the readers can get the feeling that you want to convey. Make sense? Now that's symbolic. That's symbolic. So other things you can look at: instrumental versus intrinsic. Very important. We human beings fundamentally has these two major impetus. First one is what? We always want to feel we are agent. We are not pawn. Agent pawn means in chess. Do you know chess game? You have pawns. Pawns is that you move these pawns, right? There was something behind that, calling the shots. You just work like a puppets. You work like puppets. No one wants to be just a puppets, controlled by somebody else. That's why we always feel the freedom is important. Does that make sense? So we want to be agent. Means we want to make a change. That it's coming from us. Make sense? Once we actually feel that we can make a change, wow, I could do this. It empowers us. It empowers us. It's very important because think about it again. Evolving complexity theory is what? It's a more dynamic theory. Means that initially you think something you could not do. Now, one of your students feel, wow, so teachers, I could do this. It's an excitement. It's also empowerment. So that is also related to fundamental human potential, that the feeling of agency, feeling that you can affect something. You can make something happen. You can make a difference. And the other side is intrinsic. Why it's intrinsic is that we are fundamentally meaning-making animals. Even something is not meaningful, we try to make a meaning of it. Does that make sense? For example, say Nietzsche. Nietzsche is a German philosopher, Nietzsche. You know Nietzsche? Chinese translation is Nietzsche. Nietzsche said God is dead. God is dead means what? God initially has order. Everything is explained. Now we lost that God. We are totally lost. Make sense? But what does that mean? Is that somebody has to create a system like a religion. Is that we are fundamentally meaning-making person, meaning-making animals. Without meaning, we live in chaos. So meaning-making works all the way to a very lofty, higher level like Einstein. And all the way to us, ordinary person. We have to make a meaning. Even we are prison, we have to make a meaning in a prison life so that we still feel that we can what? Hold on. Make sense? If we feel every day wake up, it's a meaningless life, what's going to happen? After several days, several weeks, months, we feel that we need to commit suicide. Because our life has no meaning. So that tells us that we are now what? Cats and dogs. Of course, cats and dogs can also depress, but they don't make a meaning. Does that make sense? We make a meaning. And so meaning making is fundamental for human beings. So that is why I talk about when we talk about talent development. For example, some of you may question, yeah, of course, when you develop talent, that talent needs to have meaning for you. Nobody will bother to develop talent if it doesn't have any meaning at a personal level, right? Of course, somebody can say, I play violin because my mom asked me to do that. I play piano, it's a boring stuff, but my dad wanted me to do that. Yeah, for a period of time, maybe they feel that way. But eventually, they have to feel ownership. My daughter, my son, all have that experience. Initially, it's always pushed by parents, but eventually they develop some feeling for the piano play, for the violin play, and eventually they develop ownership. The same thing here. So I personally feel that this model give you a feeling that why I call experiences take the primacy of talent development rather than capacity. Now you can tell my theories, the difference between my theory and the other theory. The other theory, if you introduce, how many of you Francois Gagné's model? Gagné. Yeah, so for example, Gagné's model starts with what? Capacity. Meaning gifted. You need to be gifted before we help you develop talent. Does that make sense? Now, that is a capacity theory of talent development because you need to have a capacity before we can do something about it. My theory does not presume that you need to have something before we do anything. But the primacy of experience is that once you engage something, I know something about you. Without that engagement, I don't know. So without that engagement, I can say I'm agnostic. Maybe you are great. Maybe you have the makeup of an Einstein. I don't know, right? Yeah, it could be. I don't know. But unless you engage in significant experiences, then I know something about it. I know something about it. Okay, so this is the first thing. The second thing is beyond octopus model, octopus theory. I want to introduce something that I added a slide there, which is basically, I personally feel later is very important. Very important. To some extent, Dr. Lee is here, to some extent, Howard Gardner also touched upon it. Because Howard Gardner basically, our multiple intelligence theory says, what we care about a lot about is the IQ thing. But IQ thing fundamentally is a verbal linguistic thing and also logical mathematical thing. Okay. In ancient Greece, they are talking about mesos versus logos. Logo is basically thinking logically about things. And using words. Both are using words, by the way. Both are using language, using words. But the logos thinking in words is more logical. Meso is telling stories. Make sense? Using logical basically means you are in a mode of making argument. Make sense? Making argument. It's a logical argument. The earth is round. Now that's an argument. You try to prove that's the case. It's using logo. Now when you tell a story about the earth, how the earth was born, everything, it's a meso. It's a myth, basically. Mythology, mythos. Mythos versus logo is two modes of thinking. Why I emphasize this is that traditionally we think logo is the way. Nowadays we are thinking that the mesos is a very important one. We are typically paying less attention. Storytelling. Using metaphors. Okay, all those things. I can give you more ideas. Narrative, story-based versus logical, rule-based reasoning. Okay, these are two different things. Another thing to think about this two-way is that closed self-object bound, which is a describing narrative. When you are in a narrative mode, you empathize with Earth. You empathize with other people. You are in an empathic mode of operation. When you are in the logo mode of thinking, you are detached. Does that make sense? The object world and you are detached. In a narrative mode, you are typically, you pretend that you are a chemical element. Now, how the chemical elements work? You say, think about for a second. We are all this chemical element. How that chemical element works, I tell you a story. Does that make sense? That element's running to something and depressed or something. That's a storyline, right? I can tell you one thing. One person is using this kind of story mode to describe how a chemical works, and then went ahead to win the Nobel Prize. Meaning, a chemical element does not have to using logo mode of thinking to make this discovery, but using narrative mode, he eventually figured out how this chemical works. Isn't that wonderful? Never thought, never think that there was only one mode of way to discover something, and a lot of times, even in chemistry, someone using storyline to discover the mode, right? Because we don't have other language using story, and we start to think about if I were a chemical, what's going to happen? It must be happen this way, because as a life, that's the way, right? Chemical is like human beings will work this way to overcome a hurdle. And indeed, using that storyline, he discovered a chemical process, a pathway. Okay. So that's basically, I tell you, this is a very important way to thinking. Dialogical and communicative, which is mesos. Mesos fundamentally is communicative. That's why mesos, I have a hard time pronouncing this word. Mesos, the Greek mesos way of communicating is a very much dialogical. So it's a more communal kind of a way of thinking. Get other people to think in a certain way. That I personally feel that fundamentally, logo is more artificial and mesos is more natural. Why is it? Look at our ancient time. We live in an ancient world. Which one comes first? Story comes first. Does that make sense? Mythology comes first. Wow, there was someone in the heaven, very angry. That's why we get storm. Does that make sense? That's storytelling, right? That's our origin. You know, everybody understands stories. Everybody understands emotions. right? Everybody understands those way of thinking about the world, right? Logo is later because it's supposed to be more scientific. Does that make sense? But so this is different. Another way you can think about these mesos, logos, is using left and right brain metaphor. Again, I have to emphasize it's a metaphor. Okay? It's a metaphor means that we used to have a time in 1980s. By the way, Howard Gardner's work was also affected by this left brain, right brain distinction. Right hemisphere is in charge of certain things, which is color, images, and all those things. And the left brain is more about language, about sequence events, sequence of events. So this left brain is clearly more rational. Does that make sense? This right brain is more emotional or more imaginative. Okay? The left brain is more analytical, so to speak. Okay? But we now know that it's not that sharply distinct, divided. It's a distributed system. But still, the metaphor still works. The metaphor still works, meaning that the holistical, analytical, parallel versus a serial processing that characterize this two way of thinking, which is represented in the brain to some extent. To tell you one thing is like when we do the brain imaging, we know when we processing music, pitch perception, right brain, pitch perception. Okay, pitch perception, melody, right brain. What is the left brain? Rhythm. Rhythm is left. Okay, rhythm is left. Anyway, so it's a coordination system. It's a coordinated system, but at the same time, they do have some division of labor in our brain. And so when we're using those metaphors, we can think about two ways of thinking, which is both actually can produce something great. Okay, both can produce something great. I want to get to the point of Daniel Pink. I didn't bring my book. I asked to carry this book with me for this trip, but it's in my hotel room. In that book, Pink is basically says, I think there was another line. Yeah, Daniel Pink basically says, nowadays, with the three A's, he calls 3 A's. I don't know I can do all the 3 A's. The first A is abundance. So we have lots of things, information and everything. So we have lots of material, we have a lot. And so abundance, Asia, and another A. He basically argued that we are going to live in a time when right brain advantage will play a much bigger role than left brain. Why? Because the right brain stuff is taken by machine. Is taken over by machine. Does that make sense? There's automation there, I remember. He uses 3 A's. Keep in mind, 3 A is abundance, Asia, and automation. Not automation, ChatGPT, automation. Does that make sense? What is good about the machine intelligence is good at logo thinking. Make sense? Logo thinking. Because fundamentally, machine intelligence is based on algorithm. Okay? All machine rely on algorithm. Without algorithm, it's dead. Algorithm is a fundamental. It's algorithmic thinking. And so that is basically what Daniel Pink says. So we are, with abundance, Asia, now why Asia, you would say? Outsourcing. Is that he's American. He said, we are outsourcing all those jobs to Asia. India, China, and at the time he wrote this, he said, Asia take up all our jobs. We don't have much left brain job anymore. Make sense? The automation take out left brain jobs. Left brain job basically white collar jobs. White collar jobs. We don't have that jobs anymore. What do we have to have? What do we left? Right brain, we still have the right brain. Now what is the right brain thing? Design, storytelling, symphony. Symphony basically is a synthesis. We can put things together to make something new. Empathy, emotion. We can empathize with others. Play. We can do playful things. You basically, by the way, play is very important for creativity. Okay, for creativity. Meaning making. So he's using other two words in his book. By all means, try to borrow or buy this book. It's a very instructive, very helpful book to think about. If you're a parent, if you are a teacher, it's very helpful. It's very, very helpful. He even after each chapter, he has exercise. He has a section that helps you exercise storytelling, exercise symphony, exercise design. Okay, it's very, very helpful book. Very helpful book. It's a bestseller, New York Times bestseller. Anyway, so he thinks that Daniel Pink basically says, we're going to actually, the world, our human talent is going to be major in those areas. Why? Because the machines do local things much better than us. Eventually, all those jobs that are using mainly local, machine will actually surpass us. Okay? Meaning that we used to have certain talents, the machines steal our talents, and they surpass it. So we consider talent today is no longer talent 10 years later. Okay, so this is the second metaphor, the onion metaphor. The onion metaphor basically gives us an idea about how we unfold as a person. How we unfold as a person. Think about this onion as a what? As it consists of many layers of realities. Many layers of realities. In a larger circle is a social cultural mediation. Is an experience important? That social cultural mediation of experience is important. And then you can see the second level is a construction of self, which is very similar to my view of building the self. Does that make sense? Building the self. Indeed, building the self means who you are. So who you are is a very important component of what kind of person they will become. What kind of talent they will develop. Characteristic adaptation is still a core level where you peel off this onion. And there was a course you organize yourself in a certain way. That is a characteristic, your way of dealing with the world, not another person. Now that aspect basically is that you, in a certain context, will become a doctor. Naturally, okay? And even your mom and dad say, no way. Or some people would say, you want to be an artist. Some people say, what? You want to be a starving artist? Starving artist means that you cannot get a job. You even cannot get a job. And even some people are destined to be that way, right? So that's a characteristic adaptation. Attitude and disposition as your biological core. It is still lurking behind. So I personally feel that after everything is said and done, indeed, there was something in you that is biological. After all, we are all biological beings. Does that make sense? Yeah, even socially, we have a lot of social things that building ourselves, change us, but there was still something very deeply rooted about us, which is the biological inclinations, biological tendencies, biological-based kind of aptitudes or dispositions. Does that make sense? So basically it means that wherever we are, we have this kind of onion. They have multiple layers. But I want you to look at another thing. On the one hand, each of us have what? Individual niche-picking tendency. That is unconsciously or consciously. We are heading somewhere that typically is what? Actually work in your favor, individually. Does that make sense? They usually capitalize on your strengths, make you a better fit. Does that make sense? That's a niche picking. Each of us have this niche picking tendency. That basically works for you. On the other hand, there was a cultural selection process. Does that make sense? Cultural selection process. Even you want to be artist, maybe in certain culture, they don't like they don't like artists. Does that make sense? It's almost like a Spartan and Atham. Atham people like intelligence, right? Wisdom, intelligence. They always what? Sitting there doing nothing but an armchair speculating about how the universe works. Make sense? Now, at the time, they basically said that's the useless knowledge that is the most important. If the knowledge is useful, that's not the most important part of knowledge. Does that make sense? That's why we got philosophy. What is philosophy? Philosophy is love wisdom, love knowledge, right? Philosophy. Okay, philosophy, separate these two words, is a love of knowledge, a love of knowing this world. Sparta, muscle, right? Physical power, and everything. So in essence, that you have a cultural selection. If you are, unfortunately, you are kind of a philosopher person living in Sparta, not much you can do, okay? You have to live through that, okay? But if you live in Athens, it's a paradise. Make sense? Okay, so you always have these two things working, right? Cultural selection, individual education. When I say talent development, I fundamentally looking at a person development. They initially develop a lot of individual tendencies, but they also structured by their parents. Does that make sense? And the parents, of course, a lot of ideas coming from culture, and also parents' concerns are very different. Children's concern, having fun, enjoyable, right? What is the parents' concern? Can you get a job later? Think about security is always more important. Okay, and with security you have certainty, right? You can make some money. And even physical security is the parents' concern. They eventually will be out of family, and they have to be on their own. They need to have a secure life, right? So parents' concerns are very different from children's concerns. Okay. This is some of the things I talked about evolving forces. Why I call evolving forces? It's because if you are a very young child, you don't know what you want as much as when you are 10 years later. Does that make sense? Because 10 years later, you become a 16-year-old rather than 6 years old. You know much better about what you want, what you are, what is more important than other things, right? For you than other things. So this is a set of things that I look at. For example, initially as a children, you have circular reaction in early formative spontaneous phase. My son, for example, there was one period of time, the most engaging object or engaging activity is initially it's actually playing Thomas and Friends, when he was a little kid. Thomas and Friends basically is a train, toy trains. And then, toy trains. Then it becomes Pokemon. And then it becomes Legos, building Legos. Okay, so those things. So each age, they have certain things that they're fascinated with. Okay, what are those things? If you analyze those things, it's a circular reaction. Circular reaction means the feedback, immediate feedback, and they can control certain things. They can work on certain things to build up Legos, to build up a Pokemon. That actually circular reaction basically is what? The initial your feeling of effectiveness. You can control things. You can make something happen. It actually is a sense of agency. Does that make sense? That is very important. You have a sense of agency. But that's very spontaneous. Okay? Not controlled by your mind as much. Okay? And then you have characteristic adaptation, meaning you start to realize, wow, we have some ease of learning in certain area. Certain things is difficult for me. Other things, it's so handy for me. It's so easy for me. and comparative advantage. You see, wow, my classmate always praise me for something that I feel, of course I can do that, but your classmate said, wow, you can do something like this. We cannot do, or the opposite. So you have a lot of self-awareness. Does that make sense? Self-awareness of strengths, interests, and also eventually selective affinity. Each of us have some selective affinity. Selective affinity is basically initially a chemical term. Two elements are bound easily. Other chemical elements never bound. Okay, does that make sense? Selective affinity using, that's a Goethe. Goethe is a German writer, German poet, and German philosopher. He basically says, using this word to characterize our individual's relationship with the world. Selective affinity. Okay, selective affinity. So obviously, you're using simple metaphor. Is that why you fall in love with one person but rather another person? Selective affinity. Does that make sense? You have selective affinity. Okay. Maximal adaptation. Maximal adaptation is basically once you get into something, you know it's so important that you are willing to invest your time, energy, money, even what? Your life. Make sense? Because each of the things that we pick up to do, there was something called opportunity cost. Even you get married with somebody, there was a huge opportunity cost. Do you recognize? Of course, everybody recognizes that opportunity cost. Because you marry one, you cannot marry a second one. In our modern time, at least, right? So there was an opportunity cost there. So you pick something that you want to invest time to do. It means that you go to college, pursue Ph.D. You cannot do something else. Make sense? Because your time is limited. Okay, the time is life is working that way. Opportunity cost. So maximal adaptation is always a dedicated phase of your life, which is you are willing to invest your time. You're willing to do something. We have in Chinese, I'm not sure how many of you understand Mandarin. I don't speak Cantonese, unfortunately. We call that I'm willing to 做人板凳, 人板凳, the bench, that is a cold bench, meaning you are sitting there for 10 years. Are you willing to do that? Sitting there, cannot make any noise, right? Cannot make any splash. You think it's worth it? If I were to have some success about that, I'm willing to sit on there for 10 years, that not known to anybody, because you feel that it has value. Does that make sense? Of course, no one knows that whether you can make it. Like me, I was a literature major when I was in China. I went to the United States, I pursued another major, which is psychology. How can I know that I will become something that I can make a contribution? It's like I published a book by Teachers College Press, Columbia University. I don't know. I had no idea. I didn't know all those things. But eventually you feel this is something worth to do, right? This is something that's interesting to you, and you do it, right? Maybe eventually nothing comes out of it, but so be it, right? So be it. So this kind of a commitment, basically, dedication phase, is like increasing demand is one thing, social recognition is another, but identity is also important. Identity is that you feel that this is something that it's about me. I'm willing to do it, right? Now, regardless of whether there was something always socially rewarded. Make sense? You always can have something that is socially rewarded all the time. So my feeling about a maximal adaptation is something that we all have to engage in order to develop a strong talent. So you will say, wow, there was some genius that doesn't involve the dedication, involve a maximal adaptation. How about, let's say, Elon Musk? But you should think about that's something behind Elon Musk that we didn't know much. We only see this very glamorous person. Does that make sense? It's almost like all of us see about Elon Musk is a persona. We see the public persona, but we don't know much about the story behind, right? So if you look at the story behind, maybe we change our mind. Wow, Elon Musk also is quite dedicated. If you look at Elon Musk's personality, he was a very dedicated person. He can actually sleep in an office, right? With a very shabby place. And you think about it, he's the #1 billionaire, #1 the richest guy in the world, but he's willing to live that kind of lifestyle, right? Very dedicated to work, very dedicated to work. Some people will feel, why you do that, right? And also live lonely in a factory, in a manufacturer. Indeed, if you watch that video clip, you will be very surprised. A billionaire willing to live in a factory, manufacturer, office with nothing but a bed on the ground, on the floor. Does that make sense? Like a very, very shabby, very cold place. Anyway, in my theory, you can only just to remember that my theory features very prominently two things. Characteristic adaptation. That characteristic adaptation typically fit well with the person, given a certain environment. That's the way that the person feels happy dealing with certain things, they enjoy what they do, and this is like they feel home. They feel at home when they are doing something. Okay? It's almost like you're using another term. They are in their comfort zone. Make sense? It's called characteristic adaptation. Remember the second term. Sometimes talent development, you are not in your comfort zone. And even what? It demands you are walking out of your comfort zone. What is that? Maximum adaptation. Maximum adaptation. What is maximum adaptation? Indeed, you have to go out of your zone to deal with some novel things, something unfamiliar, something extremely challenging. Just like Elon Musk recently, do you know? He spent $4 billion building these rockets. It exploded in the air. Do you remember that? Just recently. 4 minutes later. But I don't think it's a complete failure though. It's an experiment. And they already collected data. In that sense, it's that $4 billion is not completely wasted. Okay? It's just at one stage. Okay? The next rocket, next $4 billion invested probably is going to bring a success. Right? Bring success means that the second level rocket works. Then eventually, because this time it's basically the second level rockets stop working. There's something can work out. But anyway, that's my idea. Is like this two idea of a CA and MA. Okay? And Robert Sternberg always remind me that a CA and MA in the old day representing what? A chronological age versus mental age. Does that make sense? Because it's about IQ. Okay. Chronological age versus mental age. But we will say that's also become old, so we will replace with characteristic adaptation and maximal adaptation. Maximal. So this is the fundamental. If you ask me to boil down what exactly you're talking about when you say evolving complexity, you are evolving characteristic adaptation, you're evolving maximal adaptation. With these two elements, you're probably more likely to make it. You will make it. Okay, so that's a theoretical aspect, of course. Marathon metaphor is something I put there. Onset, learning, curve, peak. So it's about the time that you have to go through certain phases. Your development have to go through certain phases in order to reach destiny. Does that make sense? Just to explain that, when you run marathon, do you think, how many of you actually run marathon? Can I see hands if you indeed run marathon? No? Think about marathon when you run. I didn't run marathon. But I was told that when you run marathon, there was a period of time you feel things get worse. The body doesn't adjust well. But after a period of time, you feel it's coming back. Okay, your energy is back. It's a metabolism thing. Make sense? It's a metabolism thing. It works out, and so you have to pace yourself. You have to run over this period, which maybe turn out to be difficult. That's the metaphor. You see the metaphor? In talent development, the same thing happens at a certain point of time. How many of you know Tom Hanks, the movie actor? Yeah. Don't always look at the glamour aspect of Tom Hanks. He used to be what? Very depressed. Why he's depressed? He was not a very successful actor when he was in 20s. For how long? For about over 10 years. Nobody, well, Tom Hanks, come over, we have a character for you. No one asked him to do anything. You know what? It's quite depressing as an actor. But then suddenly, right? He won Oscar twice, back and back. Back-to-back Oscar. One is, I remember, Philadelphia, and the second one is Forrest Gump. Okay. And of course, he later on cast away and all sorts of brain something. But anyway, what I'm telling you is basically the story is that there are always ups and downs, just like running a marathon. That's the underlying message. When you run a marathon, it's not just a smooth sailing, right? In a marathon, you can run into a difficult period of time, you overcome it, and you eventually, you are the winner. Okay, so you don't do anything. Of course, this is the metaphorical aspect, the critical transition point, make or break, milestones, hurdles, those ideas are behind those metaphors. I emphasize always talent development, you need to have one thing. That's something to do with MA. Earlier I talked about maximum adaptation. What is that? Is that you have some sustaining power. Now, when I say sustaining power, I don't mean it's only about us. Individuals have sustaining power. The environment needs to have sustaining power as well. That sustain you. Does that make sense? It's almost like if you live in I earlier used the example, if you living in a cultural revolution period, no matter how sustaining power you have, it doesn't matter because the environment doesn't give you anything. It doesn't sustain you, right? It doesn't sustain you. It doesn't work. So the environment have to be conducive to your development as well. So in that sense, the environment sustain you with what? Opportunities, with challenges, with mentorship, with other things that keep you going. So that's the storyline. That's the storyline. So you see, I'm using narrative mode. Is that right? I'm using a lot of narrative mode, simply because the narrative mode is what? Communicative. A lot of the mathematics is not communicative, but the narrative is communicative. Okay. Again, metaphor. Coming up with metaphor. Beyond metaphor, because all metaphors are what? Are crippled. Metaphors are crippled means it's not perfect. Metaphor is using one thing to describe another thing, but one thing is never the other thing. You know, we say, you are lying, but you are not lying. There will always what? So certain features are does not work, right? Does not work. Now, the first metaphor, Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs, basically in his commencement at Stanford, he said, life is connecting dots. Connecting dots. Dots is a one dot, many dots. When you live through those dots, you don't know how each dot works for you. But looking back at the dots you created, everything makes sense. So why he say that? It's like he basically said life in some way is not predictable. So you cannot be too calculating. Does that make sense to you? You cannot do calculation. I have to calculate every step of the way. What? I got 90% success rate. I will do it. If you calculate like I only have 30%, I'm not going to do it. So in that sense, you have to take some risks. Actually, Elon Musk used to. Do you know Xiaomi? Xiaomi, the cell phone guy. He used to see Elon Musk, and he would say, "This is a real opportunity. I can get something from Elon Musk." You see, I have to do a lot of things. What kind of decision you make when you run into a situation like how you gauge your rate of success, and how successful you can be, the likelihood that you do something that can be successful, so that we can go for it, right? But Elon Musk say something that surprised Xiaomi. Lei Jun. Surprise Lei Jun. Elon Musk said, all I do has high risks. Because you think about when he tried the X space, the last one actually, if that one still explode, that means fail. Because he tried 3 times, it exploded. If he said, the last time he exploded, maybe he bankrupted. But that one succeeded. He did succeeded. That one saved him. But his idea is like, all I do have high risks. It's just like the recent one, $4 billion is like a God, $4 billion. So it's not completely wrong, of course. But his idea is like, all I do is like, so Lei Jun made a set. Wow, he is different from me. Because when a Chinese guy in China, we in Chinese, I fully understand why Lei Jun think that way. We suffer too much in our history. So we all crave success. Failure sucks. Okay? Failure is so bad. All right? We are poor for so long time. We all crave success. But Elon Musk is living a pretty good life, right? He's getting rich early, right? He become a billionaire very early. So he said, what's the big deal if I don't have money anymore? Indeed, he basically bet all his money in his SpaceX, right? In SpaceX. Somebody will say, now if I were you, I already enjoy beach and getting a big house and everything, right? And why you just waste this money in this very risky space ship? But he said, you know what? My dream is going to Mars. Now you have a very different, we call what? 境界不一样，境界，一个人的境界不一样。这个就是一个非常讨厌的东西。有的人境界就是比较那个 enjoy beach, doing nothing. Doing nothing is happy. No, doing nothing is very empty, according to Elon Musk. Connecting dots is basically his idea is that follow your heart is very important. Don't be too calculated. Make sense? Because once you calculate it, you know, it is very risky, right? You don't know whether you can make it, right? But follow your heart is very important. Joining conceptual and social circle is Peter Salovey. Peter Salovey was a psychologist. I don't know how many of you know Peter Salovey. He was known for developed theory of emotional intelligence. He was a clinical guy initially, and later on, you know what? Probably 15 years ago, he became a Yale president. And I don't know whether he's still Yale president. Probably he still is. At least he served for 10 years, for a long time. Okay, he used to be a well-known psychologist, and now he was a Yale president for a long time. 就是耶鲁大学校长, right? But he enjoyed what he's doing because he probably investigated emotional intelligence a lot. So he knows that how to actually be a good president, right? Be a good president. That's important. Anyway, he has a commencement speech also. He basically said, life is what? Life is a join circle. Does that make sense? Indeed. When he say join circle, he means join a conceptual circle. Initially. that you draw a big conceptual circle. I have to quote somebody again, but you know. Do you know Zhang Yiming? Who is Zhang Yiming? TikTok CEO, founder of TikTok. TikTok basically, Zhang Yiming, he used to say something like, what a person can do is determined by his 认知 cognition. But by cognition, he means what? Your 眼界. What you can see that other people don't see. That determines your success. So in that sense, what you can see, of course, Steve Jobs says something the same thing. Steve Jobs used to say, don't call me creative because I'm not creative. I just see things that other people don't see. Okay? So this 眼界 or the conceptual circle you draw is a very important. Indeed, your cognition is an important part of who you are, and eventually determine what kind of things you do. Right? If you think about a person living in a very, very remote rural areas, you should see they don't expose to a lot of things, right? They don't get exposure to lots of things. So you need to get a lot of exposure and build up your conceptual circle in terms of what a person can do. Does that make sense? Or what you can do to change the world, right? I personally would feel whatever I expose to, I will never entertain the idea of what one day I should go to Mars. But Elon Musk says, I'm going to go to Mars, eventually save human life, save human species. Okay, that's his goal. Anyway, conceptual circle. But Peter Salovey said something again is very important. Be careful about who you are with. Does that make sense? That your friendship circle, your social circle also determine what kind of person you become. Do you agree? So his idea is like almost like if you have a bunch of friends who only go to restaurants and they have lots of beers, they have lots of things, so you have become this kind of person. Make sense? The kind of circles you draw, social circle you draw, determine what kind of person you will become. And so that's the Peter Salovey. The last one is mine. I always emphasize that. Last thing is mine is that carve out a personal niche for you. Or if you don't like a personal niche, I talked to a group of people in Mensa Association. They don't like niche idea for some good reason. I'm not going to elaborate. But I can say if you don't like a personal niche is that you find your place. It works for you. You feel rewarding. Does that make sense? You feel that in that niche, in whatever small way, you contribute to other people's well-being. You contribute to society in a way. To beyond what? You earn your own living. That's your niche. Does that make sense? That's your niche. Using another word. Find your own voice. Whatever area you do, you engage. There are other people who are better than you. There are other people who do great things, right? That's the part of life, right? How many of you heard Big Fish, Little Pond? Big Fish, Little Pond is the idea. Initially, you are in a big pond. You're not in a small pond, but you are a big fish in that small pond. Are you happy? Yeah, most of the time we are happy, so we are big fish. And then, only to find what, 10 years later, you get into a big pond, you become a big small fish. Wow, how distressed that can be, because you used to think that you are always a big fish. And that big fish turns small when you are in a big pond. But I always feel that more important thing is like carving out a personal niche. It's almost like I got a big pond with someone like Bob Sternberg published what? Already 1,500 articles. I count my number of articles I wrote. It's probably everything added together, probably 150, let's say. So 10 times less or 9 times less. So Would I be depressed? Maybe I will be depressed, right? How come that someone can do that, right? But when you're using my theory, it's okay. It's okay. Why it's okay? Because you have your own niche, right? You have your own niche. More important is not compared with others. More important is that you have your own voice. So in that sense, from a town development point of view, for example, never be disappointed when you got a big pond, because a big pond has lots of advantages that a small pond does not have. Do you agree? A big pond, like Harvard, MIT, it get you lots of things if you are willing to deal with that kind of challenge, right? So in that sense, that I say this is because Herbert Marsh used to say a lot of things about bad things about you in a gifted program, for example. Why it's bad in a gifted program? Because there are lots of other people who are very strong and stronger than you. Don't feel discouraged because you have someone better than you. It's great things. It's your resources. It's your social circles that get you ahead, right? But in that sense, that kind of mentality is very important. That kind of social adjustment is very important. Eventually, carving out your niche is very important. You contribute to something, to the field in some way. For example, I feel that I have to do something that contributes to the gifted education areas or something. That's all I need to do. And that's all I need to do to draw my personal satisfaction. Okay, so that's the first, that's the last kind of metaphor. Now I want to skip this part. This is putting together. Putting everything together, this is my model. You can summarize my model as a push-sustain model. That there was some environment that evoked certain things. There was also sustaining power that eventually keep you going. The middle arrow is what? You, person. Keep you going. Eventually you go through phases, from foundational phase to transitional phase to crystallizing phase to advanced phase. And that's everything put together. Everything put together. So that's evolving, what I call evolving contextual and temporal emergence or temporal complexity. Okay. This is the way it works from earlier form to characteristic adaptation, to identity formation, to maximal adaptation. So this is the developmental model, so to speak, developmental model. So from a teacher's point of view, you can look at it to see, wow, some of my students are really early, right? And I really want to do something. Eventually, they actually have some self-discovery. Eventually lead them to what? That they like certain things, that they can do certain things. So it's more developmental-based model. I'm not going to explain what exactly how you define those things. For example, the foundationals, the early elementary school years. What kind of foundation you can build, right? It may not be specific to a particular talent, but if you build a solid foundation, you might do several options. You might have several choices. Does that make sense? You don't have to initially hang on to the tree. We call embark on a tree, and then you say it's a wrong tree. Does that make sense? You don't have to do that. So that they initially don't have to embark on any tree. You just build your foundations. Build a solid foundation. Eventually, you have to go to a particular tree, or embark on a particular boat, or get into a boat, something like that. Anyway, so that's what I thought. So that I always jokingly say people, sometimes you get into a boat that is the wrong one. A boat, 中国话, the Chinese we say, 上了贼船. I always talk to my doctoral students, say, maybe you will one day feel that you get into a wrong boat. 就你上了贼船，也没办法，对吧? You don't have any other ways. You already pursue Ph.D. for 2 years only to find that that's not something you want to do. but you still have to do it. But that's an opportunity cost, right? And you have to make a good decision. It's your decision. You say you want to pursue Ph.D. in our program, 5 years. Very typical, 5 years. And some of them spend 6 years. Okay? That's a lot of life. That's a lot of time, right? So you have to make a good decision about that. Building the self, I want to be quicker to get to the last part. I think self-development, generally speaking, why I want to talk about self-development is because I feel that talent development without self-development is not sustainable. If you look at my theory, it's already there. Just to make it more articulate. Self-development is a very important part of talent development simply because talent development can be more skill-based, based on skill. But merely building up your skill without your self-development is not going to work. It's not sustainable. One day you will ask, why I do these laborious things in the first place? Why should I do that? I can live a much easier life, just like my students going through this doctoral years, very tough, very tough. And one student, for example, recently failed a comprehensive exam. It's devastating. It's devastating after 3 or 4 years. You invested only to find that you failed your comprehensive exam. Everything you work is like going to the drain, down the drain. Okay, so childhood, I think there was a lot of things you can build on. Positive affect is the central thing. How you can build positive affect? I think it's very important because it carries with you for a long, long time. Without that positive affect, nothing sticks in your memory as long, right? And it's usually that is a very important part. Now, that positive affect can be what? One of you that give one of your students a very long-lasting memory. After they succeeded, they come back to you. So-and-so teachers, do you remember you did something? I say, I don't remember anything. But yeah, that's 20 years ago. You did something that changed my life. You see? You produce a positive affect that stick in their memory. They will thank you forever. Okay, that's a positive affect. And of course, I listed certain things there as important: physical education, arts education, build mental toughness, aesthetic sensitivity. A lot of people will say, I don't, particularly artistic. I'm not artistically inclined or something. But how do you know? If you don't have a lot of exposure or something, I'm personally still a kind of an amateur artistic lover, love painting. Everywhere I go in the world, I go to the art museum, and I enrich my life in a great big deal. So that's a very important part of our life. And intellectual curiosity, design interest, how we can build on that, and that's all about self-development. Adolescent, serious work, playfulness is not important. It's not the only thing, but how you can be serious about the work and the self-direction. Now I listed several things about childhood and adolescence simply because I don't want to go over that period of time because many of our teachers only deal with this 2-time period, 2 phases. This is an example. I probably want to skip that example. Basically, give you idea about a Nobel Prize winner, how he grew up in kind of family that eventually the kind of things in his family are based on that, on his biography, based on this chronological events, on his life. So basically illustrate how each phase, there's certain things happen to him that build up a successful career as a scientist. There was something else. 1972 Nobel Prize winner. His name is Gerald Edelman. Nobel Prize in Physiology of Medicine. discovery of antibodies. And then later on, in his later years, after his Nobel Prize, he actually worked on memory and consciousness as a neuroscientist. Very early on, he probably is one of the early pioneers of neuroscience, particularly focused on memory and consciousness. Anyway, I want to give a quote to his quote, Gerald Edelman's quote. Giving our view of high order consciousness, this is also means an account that explains the basis of how we attain personhood and selfhood. This is basically, there was early passage in this regard that by selfhood I mean not just the individuality that emerges from genetics and immunology. Meaning what? Our individuality is not just coming from our immunology and the genetics. Okay. Indeed, why immunology? I personally feel that myself, for example, I'm a little bit sensitive, allergy. My personality has some kind of a physiological aspect as an allergy. For example, I tend to suffer certain things when I'm doing something. So my nervous system is slightly different from others. You would say this is kind of an immunology aspect, but a personal individuality that emerges from developmental and social interaction. Does that make sense? That means that we are not just purely biological. We are also not purely sociological. Actually, we have three things. Every one of us have three things. One is that we are fundamentally biological beings as an individual. Second, we are fundamentally social beings. The big fish, little pond, it's a social feeling. Does that make sense? It's a social feeling. We are also more or less in some way, we are spiritual. Not necessarily religious. Spiritual means we always ask questions, so why do I do this? What's the point of investing 20 years? Like my situation, right? So in that sense, there was existential concerns. Any of those things I consider spiritual. Does that make sense? It goes beyond your current mundane living to always ask questions. So what's the point of doing those things? Okay, for you. If all of us are mortal beings, right? Does that make sense? And if all of us are bound by certain things, what's the point of our choice? Whenever you engage in those kind of philosophical musing, you engage in a deeper level. What is the meaning of my life? Because we always feel that we cannot just come to this world with what? With just a biological subsistence of existence. Like, you have to go through things. We have to have children. But you have to have something beyond that. Right? You have to have something beyond that so that we can truly say that we live a life like Maslow says. We have self-actualization. We have a peak experiences. How many of you heard of Maslow, Abraham Maslow's peak experiences? So that's existential moment. Existential moment. But anyway, that's the Gerald Edelman's world about this. So I want to skip this part. Jeff Bezos say something very interesting. Skip that part. If someone wants to have to see the slides, I want to skip that. Talent development in the age of AR. What will happen in the next 20 years? That's my guess. Okay? I want to, is that the case that we're running out of time now? It's okay? It's okay, right? Let me go through this and I will open up for some questions. Shrinking of a white-collar job is already a reality. A lot of the white-collar jobs means what? Office job. In our office, okay? Building PowerPoint like this one. But lots of things, the computer doing a good job, but we don't need someone to do that, okay? So there's a shrinking of the job, more breaking throughs in frontiers of knowledge and technology. That's still what human doing. Humans, it's not machine. Machine not creating those new knowledge. Human creating those knowledge. It means the top scientist is still human, not the machine. Make sense? So that's very important. entrepreneurship with AI. That I think want to emphasize. Eventually, how we can be a very useful, powerful person depending on whether you can use AI in a very smart way, and you can ask the questions that allow AI to serve you well. And some of the time, it's not that the AI is not powerful, but that you are not prompting AI to do great things for you. Probably all of you know the word called prompt engineer. Yeah. Okay, well paid. Okay, very well paid prompt. It means you can prompt the machine to do great things for you. If you cannot ask those right questions, the machine said, sorry, we cannot do much because you don't ask those questions. If you ask the right question, I can offer lots of things to you. Okay, that's very important. But of course, question asking takes your real understanding, takes your imagination, takes a lot of creativity. I also anticipate more self-made talents. What does that mean, self-made talent? You are not institutionally trained talents. You go to musical conservatories, you go to university, look at Elon Musk. Elon Musk finished an undergraduate and did 1 year at Stanford in economics, master's degree in economics. He dropped out. Okay, there are lots of people dropped out. And I always think about why is it? Very simple. Let me tell you the story. All our institutions are set up 30 years, 50 years ago. Make sense? Nothing like today's world happening at that time. They even don't know with all their imagination, they cannot anticipate the current world we live. So that's why we have all those institutional like, you better go through this Ph.D. training, okay? But more self-made talent means that the world changed too fast. Okay? The institution cannot keep up with it. That's why all those maybe Lei Jun, maybe Zhang Yiming, they are all, of course, many of them actually well-trained in the United States. They came back to China and to make lots of good things, right? Invented. And of course, another thing is entrepreneurship by nature. It doesn't take a lot of institutional training. You just have to have a good, I would say, you feel that there was something there, opportunity is there, right? For example, I'm very dumb in that regard. I don't get it, all right? I don't get it. So anyway, this self-made talent will be more self-made talent. And flourishing missiles talent, that's Daniel Pink. Excellence in service and professional, helping professionals. It means that there was a prediction, by the way. I saw the thing. Said ChatGPT will predict that teachers, you will be in trouble 10 years later. Because you will be out of your jobs and pack your things and go back home. I don't think so. I don't think so. Human contact is still very important. Does that make sense? The machine can teach you a lot of things, but without human contact, at least the machine will not be doing as well in terms of what we call 深入浅出. Anyone who understand what I'm saying in Mandarin? 深入浅出 means that you as a teacher, you can using some examples, metaphors, life stories to tell something about even Einstein theory. Make sense? Because Einstein theory, relativity theory is very profound, right? But you can tell stories to help students understand what calculus is before they learn calculus. Does that make sense? Before they know technical detail of calculus, they already know what the calculus is doing for us. That's very important. The machine will not tell you that way, but you can do that, right? So I don't think the teacher can be replaced by AI. Okay, I don't think so. But of course, in that sense, I think that teachers later on will face new challenges. That's for sure. Transformation of a career path. What that means is that you should always, as teachers, keep in mind that maybe in 10 years or 20 years later, in our students' lifetime, their job will change 10 times. They will switch to new jobs. Of course, it could be related jobs. But what might happen is that your old job, machine is taking place of that. And you have to do something, upgrade your skills to do something else that beyond what the machine can do. Make sense? So in that sense, you have to keep what? Upgrading yourself. Okay, learning new things. To me, that's also very meaningful things to think about. What all this means, the changes in the goal of education, I personally feel that our education system is fundamentally the product of industrial age. Industrial age means what? Producing standard products. Okay, standard products. And then it's a quality products. Everybody will, through testing. Okay. And wow, you know a lot. You can do this kind of a. We using the word in China, in mainland China, is a 刷题. You are a very high skilled 刷题. That's a skill. That's a very important skill. But it doesn't mean that you can solve a problem. You can solve lots of problems with a kind of a mode that you learn well, but you cannot solve a lot of problems that takes creativity. Does that make sense? Because the 刷题 typically doesn't involve much creativity. Okay, so that is something. Critical thinking is a very important piece. Imagining new possibilities is fundamental. Imagining new possibilities. I sometimes even feel that there was an exam I recently saw. Wow, can we think this is a big deal? They basically invent what? A toilet brush. It's an invention. Because initially it's very hard to brush clean. At the bottom of this toilet, it cannot reach out well, and we can build a long way. and you become inventor of that. But don't think that the inventor needs to be Einstein's level. No. Little things in your life. Only little things in your life. If you can find that. I don't know. Anyone who knows Richard Branson? Richard Branson? Yeah, he's an inventor, by the way, British inventor. You see, look at his life. He invented lots of things. They are small things, but change human life. Airport, airline, all the things. He changed lots of things. So he is an inventor. And also, by the way, he has a learning disability. Dyslexic or something? He has a learning disability. Anyway, so this is some of the things that I think is important that I can see. This is the last slide I had. Someone like 97 win Nobel Prize, and won Nobel Prize good enough, John good enough. He basically invented a battery, new battery. 就是我们叫锂电池吧. We use this all the time now. And so he's still working at the age of 99. This year he is 101 years age. 101 year old. I don't know whether he's still working, but very likely he's still working. Once he gets the Nobel Prize, what did he say? I better go hurry back to my lab. And maybe make another discovery. Of course, I always say he is not intended to get a second Nobel Prize. Probably not, right? And his purpose is to enjoy his work, right? Enjoy his work. So he's good enough, job good enough. So clearly he is not feeling that he's good enough anymore. You always want to keep working, right? Until even he's 100 years of age. So still MC. I think basically this is all I have to say. I would like to. We have time, right? I would like to entertain at least 2 or 3 questions. That if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer. Yes.
So you said something about maximum adaptation.
Maximum, yeah.
CNA. So in culture that we are teaching from home, there is a propensity to enroll children for extra activity after school, to the extent of really exhausting them. Because the pretext of parents come back to me and say that we're exposing them to various activities. So how do I counter that? How do I make them understand that it has to be, of course, it has to be based on their interest. And again, they come back to me, we don't know what they're interested in. We never know. Sometimes it might be so the piano playing, the violin, the after-school tutoring, all that. So how do we counter that wave?
Yeah, I think you are describing something which is probably very typical, not only in Hong Kong, but also in mainland China. I would say also in South Korea. That we, as teachers, as parents, push our students very hard. So that it's almost like that they suffer something we used to call, in a professional, we call professional fatigue or burnout. And still can have academic burnout because we push them too hard, we're working too hard on that. When I say that the maximum adaptations, I really feel that this is not something that we push them to do that. We create a situation when they feel that they feel the need to work. So the motivation is not coming from us, the motivation coming from themselves. Give you one example. Over there, I remember, it's not in China or somewhere. They used to be working very hard to handle the exam, the test. The test, we have a testing kind of a culture, okay? But then when we set up a lot of work, robots, projects of robots, or project of some kind of biology projects, okay? Some of the kids, they actually come to school earlier than usual to work on this project because at home they are not able to do that. And some of the kids say, I want to go to school earlier so that I can work on my project. That kind of thing, so you can see the difference. It's not pushed by teachers in any way. It's that they feel that the project is so engaging. So they feel that oh wow, if I'm not get this done, I feel that we are behind. You know what I'm saying? So it's coming from inside, coming from their personal inside. Now, how we actually can handle the situation, indeed, the children's, indeed, we work them too hard, so to speak. That is, we have to pace themselves. We have to pace the children's, students' learning. But if you look at, in your situation, giving them a lot of extracurricular activities to work on, plus they have to work in their school curriculum and everything, indeed, they cannot handle that. And then they have a problem. I personally feel that the entire school culture needs to be changed in a way that they still have lots of leeway to do other things. I want to give you one example from United States, which is New York City. New York City has several top-ranked high schools, which is, for example, give you at least two. One is Bronx Science High. One is Stuyvesant Science High. Stuyvesant, one is in Bronx, and Stuyvesant in Manhattan. All students are investing their time in two areas. One is in the clearly academic area, but they also do lots of social work, social activities, taking what they call leadership positions. So it means that they are not relaxed in any way that we can think about. I asked, for example, Stuyvesant and the Bronx, both of them are day school. You know what I'm talking about? They are not boarding school. They are day school, means that they have to, after school, they have to go home. And because of that, they have to take a lot of time New York City is very big. From their school to home, it takes 1 hour or more than 1 hour. I was told, for example, those schools, it's quite amazing. Those high school, science high school, they only sleep 4 or 5 hours a day. Every day they sleep 4 or 5 hours. But they have to get up very early and carpool to go to school. And after school, carpool back. And typically those carpool is a couple of parents get together, living in the same area. They actually hire a rental car to carpool them to the school and back and forth. They typically do those kind of things. So they end up working very, very hard. You know what? What is the difference? The difference is that the teacher didn't ask them to do that. The student do it. So in that sense, if the students are willing to sleep only 4 or 5 hours, and that's the situation. Indeed, it's a tough situation in that kind of school. I also know that there are a lot of counseling problems, the mental health problem also. So they have a very strong presence in mental counseling, mental health counseling. You have to do that. You have to do that, particularly in that kind of school. For example, Stuyvesant. It's a one building in Manhattan, center of the Manhattan. One building is probably 8 building-story building. You got 2,000 students in one building. And that one building have everything: classroom, labs, you name it, office and everything in one building with 2,000 students. Of course, it's everybody is communicating with everybody, know everybody, what other people are doing. It can be very motivating, but also it can be very stressful. In that sense, I'm trying to say that the U.S. students have never think that American students just relax and do simple things, having lots of fun. No. In the United States, if you want to go to MIT, you work your tail off. There was no way you can go to MIT without that. Yes.
Quick question. You mentioned that as a scientist using narrative or stories to discover chemistry.
Chemicals.
First of all, I want to know the name of that scientist.
Oh, yeah.
And how to actually use narrative to discover new things.
Using narrative means that I can give you that article. So because one of my colleagues wrote an article about this story. Because he says creative have 2 modes. One mode is analytical. But when you use your analytical mode, you basically use rule-based reasoning. If this happened from our theoretical perspective, something else can happen. But then you get into a stalemate or dead end. Meaning what? This kind of a logical thinking doesn't get you anywhere. And then he thinks that his story, my colleague's story is like you switch to a narrative mode. Instead of thinking about this chemical, this is the way the chemical works because I learned a lot of chemical theory. But it doesn't work. How about this? I imagine myself is this chemical. If I run into this situation as a person, what I would do? So he is using basically this metaphor to walk through himself into this chemical process. Okay, of course you still need to have those chemical knowledge, right? But this is a simulation in terms of simulating how human works versus how a chemical works in that environment. It's a narrative story. But narrative story doesn't mean, well, it's a completely deprived of knowledge, but it does mean it involves all sorts of complexity in that context. And indeed, he using that method eventually designed his experiment, succeeded. So you think it this way. Using logical approach, okay, doesn't work out. Using your imagination. Imagine yourself is a chemical. What's going to happen? And indeed, you're using your empathy to think about a chemical can't happen in sort of getting into trouble. A chemical never get into trouble, right? But think about it, as if the chemical is getting into trouble. They try to find a way to get out. Now, what is the way to get out? It's almost like, give you another example. Do you know Steve Chu? Zhu Diwen, the Chinese American who got a Nobel Prize. What he's going to get a Nobel Prize for? He basically find a way to measure an atom, A-T-A-O-M, atom. Initially, no one can measure that, observe that movement of the atom. Then he figured out a metaphor. Again, it's another metaphor. Even though in this situation, it's about observation, the equipment. He said, what will happen if we put the mirror there? We have a torch shooting a light to the mirror, and the mirror will turn over because initially it's hiding there, but I'm using a separate thing that this light will shoot into that part. That mirror will, this atom will be reflecting in the mirror. Of course, I can observe that. Does that make sense? Otherwise, it's always hiding over there. It's also using metaphor because the equipment is more complex than that. But he using that metaphor, he come up with a way to measure that atom, not item, atom. Make sense? Now, in this story, that it's a different matter, but again, is using a metaphor. Using a metaphor. I personally feel that what we call storyline, what we call narrative, metaphor, empathy, play, meaning those Dan Pink put there, is finding another way of creativity. And do you know Chen Xuesen? Chen Xuesen he was a big guy, right? Big scientist, and he used to think that we have a 抽象思维, but we also have 形象思维. Make sense? What we call this narrative is a 形象思维. For example, you imagine yourself as a chemical. It's a 形象思维. Does that make sense? 形象思维 maybe we just translate into image thinking or thinking in image. Thinking image rather than thinking by rules.
One analogy is because I'm doing the data aspect, we call it data visualization. How to visualize
Visualization.
so that you can get insight.
Yeah, visualization is the way to handle sometimes you get into a stalemate. You say, how about getting out of that is using this kind of visualization. By the way, for example, give you another example of this. There's a Heisenberg versus Schrödinger. Okay, Heisenberg and Schrödinger find the same thing, but Heisenberg is using statistics, okay, and Schrödinger is using visual image. Okay. By the way, the Schrödinger is a very clever person who using image to illustrate a point, including Schrödinger's cat. Schrödinger's cat is describing superposition. The idea is that before you see the cat is dead and alive at the same time. When you open it, it's either dead or alive. Make sense? So he's using this. Of course, he's trying to do that to challenge quantum mechanics. But actually, by that experiment, thought experiment, he discovered a very important principle. It's called superposition. Anyway, yeah.